Good morning. We welcome to the meeting of the Policy Committee Board of Directors for the Monterey Bay Community Power. We are very thankful for Watsonville letting us have this venue. This is very nice. It's a much easier setup, and we have much better opportunities for the public to see what we are doing and where we're going. I think we'll start this. Is there anybody that needs to take the oath of office this morning? First of all, let's call the roll, please.
Council Member Kaufman Gomez.
Present.
Council Member Termini.
Present.
Supervisor Parker.
Here.
Council Member McShane.
Here.
Council Member Hoffa. Council Member Delgado.
Here.
Council Member Orozco.
And I'm the alternate for Maria Orozco, Ana Velasquez, the City of Soledad.
Thank you. Supervisor De La Cruz. Council Member Friend.
Present.
Chairperson McPherson.
Here.
Thank you.
We have a quorum.
Yes.
Thank you. Is there anybody that needs to take the oath of office? Have you? Nobody. Everybody's been in.
As an alternate?
Have you taken the oath of office?
I believe we do that on the initial meeting in February.
Okay.
Very first
Yes.
meeting, yes, in May.
Okay.
Great.
All right. We'll get right to the item number 3. Very, very pleased to welcome and introduce our Chief Executive Officer, interim Chief Executive Officer, I guess, until September 1st. Is that right? I guess. Tom Habashi, and would like to hear some comments if you had some.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that you give me the opportunity to work in my own backyard now that I live in Monterey Bay in Pacific Grove. I'm looking forward to working with you for next year and make Monterey Bay Community Power the best of all the ones that are in place already.
Okay, we'll move to item 4, and we're going to be hearing more from Mr. Habashi, I know, as we go along here. There's oral communications for items not on the agenda. Is there anybody in the public that would like to address us for items that are not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll come back. Does anybody on the board have anything that's for items not on the agenda? Mr. Delgado?
Yes, thank you. I went to the potluck at Moss Landing Marine Lab about a month ago, hosted by a lot of the volunteers that went door to door for Monterey Bay Community Power to solicit support from the communities. And it was well attended, packed, 150 people. And there was some concern expressed that we not become a mini PG&E. And this was a new concept to me because this is all new for me. But the concern was that we don't go down the road of buying the cheapest power from the farthest away out-of-state sources, because then that wouldn't create the jobs and the multiplier effect of spending money locally. And that seemed to be a big point at that potluck, other than they had some great videos. Bruce, you were one of the key commentators in the video, and it showed the work that's gone on the last several years, encapsulated in like a 10-minute video, maybe 15-minute video. A very inspiring video. It was a great event. And I didn't understand until that event how much public support it required to get us to this point. So I was kind of like riding in the wave that was a lot of energy from other people besides myself. So thank you for Bruce and everyone who was involved in making this happen. And I'm so happy that this organization has such a strong public component behind us that may not be here today, but they're ready to go to bat for us and make us as good as we can be. So that was great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. This has been a 4-year process, and it is an unknown. I mean, this is going to be a new proposal that for people, and I can understand there some people's I wouldn't say concerns, but maybe they're concerns about how we are going to operate. But I think we're going to get a much clearer picture as we move along. We've been saying this throughout the process. I am very excited. I haven't been involved in this for 4 years now, but that we do have the first Tri-County agency of its type, and I really think this is going to be a very good cooperative effort and an example that other communities can follow, and we'll probably hear more of that kind of a issue from Mr. Hibashi here in a moment. But I think that I can understand some people's concerns, but I feel very confident we're going to be able to do what we have said we're going to do in increasing our dependence on renewables, have a local governance, and have a job creator here as well, and be at least at parity with what the rates are in our initial startup when we really get going next spring. Anyone else have any comments?
Could I?
Yes, Ms. Gomez.
Thank you.
Councilman
I did
Gomez.
place a request for staff to provide a glossary of terms in the packets. As this information goes out to be more public, a lot of the terms may not be too familiar, so that would be helpful, I believe.
I did see that, and we'll try to include that in the future packets,
Thank
beginning
you.
with the September meeting.
Anyone else have any comments? Okay, we'll move down to item number 5, the consent agenda, to accept a staff report regarding the MBCP, and that's Monterey Bay Community Power. Administrative and organizational updates, the banking and credit update, the agency administrative and organizational issues, including agency insurance, preparations for the new CEO, the Form 700 reminder. I hope that all members of the board have been able to fill that out. If not, please get those in as soon as possible, and probably talk to Carol Johnson about that. And the Monterey Bay Community Power staffing and personnel matters. Is there anybody that would have, from the board, that would have comments on the consent agenda?
I move consent agenda.
I'll second the motion.
Second, you have a comment, Mr. Delgado.
Brief question. Does the agency insurance regard all of the cities guaranteeing that they're still supportive of their piece of the security, or is that a different issue? We talked about it at our last meeting, and I wasn't sure if that was agency insurance or something else.
Well, I think that is the overall insurance. Is that correct, Mr. Bashi? Can you, that everybody is responsible for their, go ahead.
It's just a simple insurance policy just to make sure that any errors and omissions are covered. So you pretty much will be all insured as directors of the agency.
Okay, so that's different than what I was thinking. Thank you. I have no further question.
Very good. Any member of the public would like to address an issue on the consent agenda, as mentioned? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously. Now to go to the regular agenda, adopt a resolution to amend Monterey Bay Community Power fiscal year. That's item number 6. This is for the authority's fiscal year to run from October 1st to September 30th to facilitate the repayment of the loans that we have taken out. Is there any comments from staff about this at all?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Any comments from the board? Any input from the public? Any comments from the public on the resolution? Okay. Entertain a motion to accept. Yes, Mr. Friend.
I just have a question on the timing. Caught in the middle there. Are we waiting because?
But you press that button. Excuse me. Yeah, it just says on and off there. Yeah.
Yeah, my question is just about the timing. Is it just a convenience thing for the?
It has to do with the likelihood of needing to pay off the debt, the line of credit that we're going to get from the bank within 1 year from the time that we enter into the agreement for the line of credit, or, which I believe the law says, or it's really the earlier of 1 year or the end of the fiscal year during which the loan was agreed to. So in order for us to get the full year, basically to be able to pay off the loan, we needed to change the fiscal year because the agreement is going to come about looks like at the end of September. So changing our fiscal year from October to September will give us the longest amount of time to be able to pay off that loan.
I understand that. I guess the second part of the question then would be, is your operating budget going to be at the same timing then? So your operating budget is going to be in the October 1, September 30th.
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
I'll move the item.
Okay.
Second?
Second, okay. Do you have a question?
Yes. Is there an update regarding, this is the question I wanted to ask earlier and it was misplaced, but is there an update on the City of Monterey and City of Salinas' meeting last night? It's shown here that that they expect to have the city's agreement on their agenda last night.
I did not have a chance to look at those meeting video from last night.
Okay.
We're in.
It passed.
Okay, Salinas, we have that, they're in,
Well done.
I don't know about Monterey.
I'm not sure about Monterey, but.
The good news is
Oh,
that,
excuse me. Yes, sir. Could you identify yourself, please?
In Mr. Hoffa's absence, I just wanted to let you know that last night at the council meeting, we did pass that agreement.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
so then the good news is that everybody has signed on, all cities and counties.
Right. So we have 16 cities and 3 counties.
Congratulations.
Okay. Let's see. We have a motion, a second. Is there any public comment? Did I ask for any public comment on this? Okay. No public comment. Got a motion, a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So ordered. Now adopt a resolution for the implementation plan required by the California Public Utilities Commission. This is very critical. I think this is a several-page document, and I think one of the primary objectives, as stated, are to reduce electric sector greenhouse gas emissions within the counties and the cities, of course, stimulate renewable energy development, promote energy efficiency and demand reduction programs to sustain competitive electric rates for the long term. And I think this is going to be important for people to understand just the timeline or implementation. So I appreciate you being here, and go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Kirby Dussel with Pacific Energy Advisors. I had the pleasure of speaking with many of you about a month ago at your joint board meeting, where an overview was provided regarding the implementation plan. And I think this morning what we want to do is recap a little bit of the information regarding that plan, why it's necessary, what it entails, and then highlight some key details that have been filled in since that time. And then, of course, allow for questions and discussion thereafter. Do we have a way of advancing the... Oh. All right, so without further ado, just a quick reminder about what the implementation plan is. It's an element that was spec'd out in Assembly Bill 117, which really provided for community choice to exist in the state of California. So the Public Utilities Code now is the part of the California Code that includes references to the implementation plan and its necessity for community choice aggregators. And what basically needs to be included in the implementation plan are key details regarding the process of aggregation for each entity that intends to launch a community choice aggregation program, as well as key details about that organization, some information regarding the planning and procurement process that will go into providing for the requisite energy supplies that are needed for customers of that organization, and then key details regarding what I guess you would say contingencies in the event that, say, things go wrong for the organization and has to disband and terminate itself. And this list right here, which may be a little bit tough to see, I apologize, the font's rather small, but this borrows directly from the pertinent section of the Public Utilities Code, highlighting key areas that need to be addressed within a CCA implementation plan. And you can see here, we've got a variety of items that need to be covered, thinking about things like just the general process and consequences of aggregation, so what this entails, why are you doing this, who's included in your program, how will you be organized, what sort of leadership structure will be put in place, what sort of governance structure will be put in place, methods for setting rates and disclosing information to customers, entering into agreements, and then, of course, as I mentioned before, what happens in the event, very unlikely event, that things were to go wrong and the program were to need to disband. All of those items need to be discussed, and of course, in the draft document that you've been provided with, those are addressed. And I think it's worth noting at this point that the document that we've been working on in cooperation with staff is substantially based on a template that's been successfully moved through the Public Utilities Commission certification process. And so there's a lot of language that borrows heavily from previously developed documents, and I think that will really serve you well during that review process, which is 90 days, and it will begin as soon as you choose to adopt the plan and submit it to the Public Utilities Commission. So moving right along here, this has already been discussed a little bit already today. Very key to the implementation plan is the identification of the members of the Community Choice Aggregation Program. And in this case, of course, you have 19 of them, 3 counties, 16 cities, and those are all highlighted within the plan, identifying those entities as your membership. In terms of governance, there is some discussion about the two kind of the bifurcated board structure that exists with both the operations and policy board, the identification of the 11 different individuals that comprise each one of those governing bodies and the general purpose for each one of those entities. And then there's also a discussion of the different functional responsibilities that need to be attended to by this organization, which will all be conducted under the leadership of your CEO. And these are kind of generally highlighted right here. Items like power supply planning and procurement, communications and customer management, which you can imagine is very kind of central to this process. A lot of notifications that need to go out per statute, and then a lot of voluntary communications that will go out just to promote general information regarding your program. And then one of the very key items that you'll soon become highly familiar with is the regulatory and legislative process that exists within the electric utility space. Lots of regulations, as there probably should be, and lots of pertinent legislation. And you see much of that. You're likely aware of it, things like the Renewable Portfolio Standard and GHG emission reductions that are very much front and center in California energy policy. All of these items require compliance reporting, require representation within the various jurisdictional regulatory agencies, and then, of course, you'll also want to be front and center at the legislature as well, representing your interest to the extent that you have a stake in various bills that are being considered. And then also, of course, the basic administrative support items, HR, IT, et cetera, that need to be attended to as part of this new organization.
Can I ask just a query or just to clarify? You said 90 days for the CPUC to accept this, and we're going to be at the back end of that. It's probably, we should anticipate it's going to take them 75, 90 days before they make that decision, and it's probably going to be just fine. But I'm just trying to let the general public know about the timeline. This is not going to be done in the next 10 days by the CPUC. It's probably going to be closer to the 90-day. Is that right?
Yeah. So that's a really, really good question that you ask there. And I think what we've seen recently when these implementation plans are submitted is a certification timeline that doesn't come close to the 90 days. It's usually been about half of that time. Now, that said, they are allowed the full 90 days, so that's what you really need to count on. But there are a lot of items that can occur in parallel during this review process, one of which is the initial procurement process, going out, working with suppliers to identify who it is that might be sourcing the various energy products that are needed for your various customers, and getting that ball rolling. Of course, no contracts will be signed until the implementation plan is certified. That's really kind of a milestone marker there. And there are, of course, other things that can go on to customer communications and the like. So there will be many things going on at the same time that this document is sitting in the hands of the Public Utility Commission's Energy Division. And that is the division that's responsible for reviewing this document. So hopefully, through the use of the template approach that we've taken here, that will cut down that review period. And like I said, we've seen it take about half the time generally. But of course, we need to allow for that 90 days, so.
Yep. Kaufman goes.
Can I ask a question before we get too far? The matrix didn't seem to mention anything about the timeline itself, which was the Chapter 5 of this. Is that necessary with CPUC to let them know at least where we're at in terms of a timeline for putting together?
Yeah, so in terms of the actual timeline, the steps that you're going to be taking in order to get this job done, there are key elements of that timeline that are highlighted throughout the document, though there isn't necessarily a specific kind of concise timeline that's included in the document itself. So the commission is being made aware of key milestones that need to exist and when those are expected to occur, but there isn't really a graphical representation of what that timeline looks like. What they're most interested in is when you're intending to commence service to customers, and then, of course, when you intend to notify those customers consistent with statute about when service is going to commence. And that's
Yes, Mr. Friend.
Do we have to go through the hearing process, or is this just strictly an administrative action by the CPUC?
No, this is an administrative review. So they're going through making sure that all of the key kind of sections that need to be addressed are in fact addressed. They may have some questions for you. Typically, they're fairly easy to answer. That's at least what we've seen in the past. And so there may be some clarifying comments that you need to make in response to those questions, but it's usually a pretty straightforward process, and it is in fact an administrative review.
Okay, because if we have to go through the hearing process, there's no way 90 days is going to.
Yeah, agreed. And thankfully, that isn't what we need to do. And then in terms of commencing service to customers, there's an anticipated two-phase approach to this process that would commence in March of 2018. And during that first phase, about 37,000 of your customers would be enrolled, and those would all be non-residential customers. So these would be your commercial. I think you have about 40 industrial customers as well, a whole lot of agricultural customers, as you can imagine. All of those accounts would be enrolled during that initial phase. And as is pretty typical with that group of customers, even though they're relatively small in number compared to the residential customer class, they comprise the majority of your energy use. So you can see there that about 65% of your energy requirements would be accounted for in that initial phase. And then moving ahead to July of 2018, that would be the second and really final phase of this process where all of your residential accounts would be enrolled. And there's a reason for that, and it's probably worth talking about it right now. There's some, structurally, there are some rate differences between commercial customers and residential customers. And generally speaking, for residential customers, the generation rate, which is kind of the key component of the electric utility bill against which you're competing, that is flat for residential customers, generally speaking. That is not the case for commercial accounts, where there are seasonal differentiations in rates, where summer rates are typically very high, winter rates are relatively low. And so to the extent you can launch at a time that really kind of coincides or front ends that summer period, you're able to create some nice operating margins for the program, which help offset some of the costs that you're going to be incurring to launch the program. So that's the thought process, in case anybody was wondering, behind the phase-in plan. And then in terms of the finances for the program, there's quite a lot of detail included in the implementation plan in that regard. There's some, I think, a nice couple of summary tables there related to pro forma operating projections. And you'll see in the section that addresses program finances, there's an estimated $13 million of startup funding that would be needed, the majority of which would be necessary as working capital. So you'll send out, or PG&E on your behalf will send out bills to customers. And there's a bit of time, of course, that those customers have to pay that bill, but you'll owe your suppliers money in advance of that revenue receipt. So that's the reason there for that working capital requirement, substantially anyway. And then you'll also notice that there's a very nice operating surplus that's projected as part of MVCP's operation. And in terms of the disposition of those net revenues, you can see here some of the key items of interest that may be addressed through those surplus revenues, things like creating operating and rate stabilization reserves, offering various rebates to promote the broader objectives of this organization, whether those happen to be for clean energy or storage or whatever the case may be. And then, of course, just general cash rebates to customers. And I think Tom may have some additional comments on that in a little bit.
Question before you move on?
Yes. Mr.
Is it
Brokaw.
okay to have questions? You want to wait till the end of the presentation?
Go ahead. Let's, while we're on
Okay.
the topic.
Thank you. That second bullet, rebates for programs promoting local carbon-free, that's starting to get at what the people at the potluck were talking about. So that word local, is it referring to local power producers?
Absolutely. So I think what's envisioned there, and it'd be great to hear from Tom on this as well, but I think some of the key items that would fall into this category are programs like net energy metering, which would promote and support the installation of behind-the-meter solar installations and other forms of renewable energy that might be customer-sided. Feed-in tariff programs, so these would be for smaller scale, kind of commercial-sized, locally situated renewable infrastructure. And there have been many CCAs so far that have successfully launched feed-in tariff programs to support the development of local renewable infrastructure, and that's certainly another item that would fall into that category. Energy storage would be another one. Tom, I don't know if you've got any other comments to add in that regard?
Yeah, sure. We have been talking about what kind of programs we need to implement and looking at it from return on investment. And we're finding that anything that has to do with fuel switching and peak shifting, that tends to bring the highest return. And here, when I say return on investment, it's the amount of reduction in greenhouse gases per dollar spent. So this seems to be at least on the top of the list of the programs that we're going to be looking at, along with a number of other programs that Kirby already spoke of.
Thanks, Tom. And then in terms of the service offerings that MBCP anticipates providing to its customers, you can see here some key highlights of the offerings that are described in the implementation plan. Of course, the majority of your customers will be defaulted in to the I guess, quote-unquote, basic service offering, even though that will be a very nice offering in terms of the environmental benefits as well as the rate characteristics. And in general terms, what's anticipated for that default service offering are rates that are at or below those of the incumbent utility. So kind of leaving the customers no worse off, if you will, from a rate perspective. And then in terms of the environmental profile of that particular product, we're really targeting ultra-low GHG emissions or near zero. And the reason that I think you find that kind of maybe a amorphous term being used is because we're in the middle right now of a very interesting period of time where Assembly Bill 1110, which some of you may be familiar with, this is really trying to promote the retail level disclosure of GHG emissions through the use of the power content label, which goes out annually to retail electricity customers. And right now the California Energy Commission is kind of grappling with how that's going to be implemented. And we don't really know exactly what that methodology is going to look like. And so to say right now definitively that we could offer zero GHGs when we don't know exactly what that methodology is going to look like is a little tough. But we do know that we can get very, very low in terms of the GHG emission profile. So that's why that language is being used here, just trying to be realistic about how that's going to look at the end of the day. And then in terms of the voluntary service option, there's one that's articulated right now, but we acknowledge that there could be more in the future. There could be 3 or 4 or however many you choose, depending on the different rate options that you might want to make available to your customers. But for the time being, the voluntary service option that's being characterized in the plan would come at a slight premium based on costs of those resources, and it would deliver 100% California-based carbon-free electricity. So this would be done through the procurement of substantially anyway renewable resources and then hydroelectricity, all from in-state generators.
Can I have a question? So when you turn the switch on and everybody comes over to Monterey Bay Community Power, how is this going to be switched over in terms of the voluntary product being, offered to them? I mean, is it a second marketing phase, or is this that we turn them on and maybe this is something in terms of the time of when this would be effective for those that want to go into this program? Do we have this actually on a timeline for marketing? Is that what would end up happening here for this option?
For marketing the product, we're going to do that when we actually begin to notify people that they're going to be served by us. We'll give them the right to opt out or opt up.
Right.
So that's how they get to know about it. From an operational standpoint, most likely we will forecast how many people will opt up. Then we will acquire our resources to make sure that we have that additional green resources that we buy from California to accommodate the increase in demand that's coming from the people who opted up.
And then still the analysis of how much that cost would be to the consumer would be part of the rollout and the marketing part of this?
Yes, of course. We'll tell them exactly how much it's going to cost to opt up.
And that, when might that take place? By the end of the year?
The first notification is likely to be going out in January. Am I close enough?
First
Yeah,
year.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's happened with other programs throughout the state is that there tend to be a lot of direct communications with larger customers, and many of those customers, particularly in this region, may have sustainability goals or other environmentally focused goals within their organizations, and this is a great time to communicate the availability of this voluntary service offering that can really be used to promote the achievement of those goals within those larger energy users. And I think there's been a lot of success during those communications and recruiting interest and signing folks up for those voluntary programs. So that's something else to kind of keep in mind too.
Just to add quickly, all the counties and the cities that are part of this organization have lots of facilities that we will be serving, so I encourage you all to opt up.
Comment?
Oh, yeah, Mr. Delgado.
Thank you. The 100% California-based, I think that's a great start. And to me, it would be nirvana if that were in the future 100% tri-county based, because that's going to benefit our economy, jobs, and all the rest of it. So is that something that's part of this organization, a drive to go toward that tri-county based carbon-free energy, or is it not?
There's certainly not a clear answer, and you shouldn't actually entertain the idea, is it or is it not, until you had an opportunity to see what the numbers look like, what the resources done or implemented or built locally versus some of the resources that will be built outside of this region. The one thing I know is we gonna need 700 megawatt to serve this region, and in order for us to be able to build that with local resources, the only local thing that we can build around here is going to be solar, and to serve that 700 megawatt year round, given the capacity factor of what the solar is relative to the kind of consumption that we have, we need to build 1,400 megawatt worth of these resources, and each one of those requires about 6 acres and to put solar in it. So you can imagine how tough that's going to be. We will get through all these details and the operational side of it and the cost side of it, and then you folks will get to decide.
Thank you.
Brent.
I just have a comment on his question. Is if you look at the numbers that Tom told you, 1,400 megawatts, if you've been paying attention to what happened in Panoche Valley, where a group decided they were going to build 400 megawatt solar plant, and because of the environmentalists, it's now 123 megawatts. So we're looking at 10 or 15 of those plants to be built before we can even realistically look at that tri-county 100% solar, 100% renewable. So it's a huge undertaking. And I'm not sure, with all the open space that we have in the 3 counties, that it's feasible right now with the technology today. So it's going to be a long, long battle, like Tom says. It's a great goal. It's got to be realistically looked at. 100% renewable purchasing is probably realistic real easily, but getting 1,400 megawatts built in a tri-counties is going to be monumental. It's a huge task.
Right. Parker?
Mr. Chair, thank you. I think on this topic, and there are a few others where I know that this document is meant to be fairly general, but I wonder if this, and then there are a couple of other things that I want to bring up later, but does it make sense to put in a statement in this implementation plan that expresses our intention or our aspiration to, and it is embedded in here in a couple of places, but I wonder if, or is this something we should just discuss later, analyze what it would take, how much locally produced energy can we aspire to, and then figure out sort of timelines for that. But it seems to me that some sort of statement in this document that we as a community power board, an organization, have it as a priority to develop as much locally sourced carbon-free energy as we possibly can. I mean, it seems that, and the details of that, of course, would have to come later, but it may be something that this board, when we get to the discussion point, might want to try to find a way to put a sentence like that into the appropriate place of this plan, if that's something that people agree is an important priority.
Mr.
If I
Boschman?
may dovetail on
Yeah,
that.
right.
And it's interesting, I thought about that when I was going through this as well, Jane, because, where is what I would like to call Bruce McPherson's kind of, the soapbox speech that you've given, that speaks to local jobs, local energy generation, et cetera. And maybe that's the website, maybe it's the marketing material, because it seems like you said this document's pretty boilerplate and is down to the nitty-gritty, so to speak, with what the CPUC wants. But ultimately, values and sort of the soul of what we're trying to do here someplace needs to be expressed so that we know what we're aiming at. It might not be realistic to generate 1,400 megawatts overnight solar across the Tri-County area, but it doesn't hurt to know that that's something we're aiming for.
Just to quickly, before this goes a little too far, Dana just reminded me that this is in the JPA. In your JPA, there's a paragraph in there that talks about promotion of local generation. This document that's going to the CPUC really need to be vanilla, really vanilla, nothing added to it that will make commitments that you may not be able to back off from it later on. So I suggest that we move on with this document. We definitely need to get it to the CPUC as soon as possible because it takes 90 days for it to come back. And we don't want to be engaged in contract negotiations in December. I guarantee you it's going to cost us a few more $1 million if we try to do that. So to the extent that we start our negotiations in November, then that's the best way to go. And for that to happen, this document needs to be off to the CPUC tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah. Yes, did you have?
Yeah, just a quick question. I think that this is being referred over in terms of having the community participation, and we've already mentioned that through the JPA process in here, that once we engage the community, then we'll know a little bit better on that plan, but let's stick to vanilla.
Any other questions?
I have a question, just a clarification. The plan on page 20 does state under the capacity, capacity requirements. So if you can explain that, because it does state on the second paragraph, that a portion of the Monterey Bay Community Agency's capacity requirement must be procured locally from the Greater Bay Area as defined by the CAISO, and other portions must be procured from local reliability areas outside the Greater Bay Area.
Absolutely, yeah. Happy to comment on that. So reserve capacity is basically, it's a compliance product that you need to purchase as a load-serving entity within the state of California. So all of your peer CCAs, they all have to purchase this. PG&E and the other investor-owned utilities need to purchase this. And basically, that reference, I think, is a little bit misleading because it's a term that's used by the regulators to define a general region in which these generating resources that you're purchasing capacity from need to be located. Local, when you say local resource adequacy capacity as it relates to this compliance product, unfortunately, it doesn't mean the same thing as like a local solar resource or something like that, which could potentially qualify as a local resource adequacy product or resource. But in this context, it's a little bit different. This is more about just providing for enough capacity to exist on the grid across the whole entire state, so that if outages occur with transmission lines or it gets super hot and demand is very high, that there are enough generators across the state to produce enough electricity in the event that usage spikes. And so it's a little bit different than, say, true local resource development, where you're talking about a photovoltaic solar resource or storage asset or something like that that might be situated within the Tri-County area.
Okay. Other questions?
Okay, so just a couple more slides here. This one here, I really think, even though the information's general, I think this is kind of a key piece of the puzzle, and I would concede that it's underdeveloped at this particular point in time, and there's a reason for that, because a lot of the programs that you'll ultimately decide to incorporate and administer as part of this organization, they will come to you in terms of the details down the road. And I think, like so many other programs before you, it's it's a responsible approach to walk before you run, to make sure that all of the administrative details, all of the technical elements between you and the incumbent utility are working smoothly before you go and start offering new programs. It's kind of like, I use this analogy, it's probably a poor one, but it's, there's a reason that the airlines don't serve drinks while the plane is taking off, because there's a lot going on at that particular point in time. They wait for the plane to kind of reach cruising altitude before they get out the carts and start pushing them around. This is kind of the same thing here. Energy efficiency, energy storage, promoting local renewable resources, very important for this organization. I think that goes without saying. But as to how those different programs will be structured and ultimately administered, as well as funded, those details will basically be developed over time. And I don't think it makes them any less important. It just means that you're going to give them some thought so that they're done well and appropriately and in the best interests of your customers at the time that they're launched. And so you can see here some of the key pieces of the puzzle that are really consistent with your charter objectives in terms of the programs that may be offered by this organization in the future. And then the second bullet here is, I think, a key piece of the puzzle as well. So integrated resource planning is a concept that I think has a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people. There's a joint proceeding right now in the state of California where key details regarding what these plans need to look like for community choice aggregators are being developed. And so this is a requirement that you will have, and I think it would be done whether or not it was a specific regulatory requirement, to be honest with you. And this is really a document that will ultimately articulate how it is that you'll provide for all the different energy products that your customers need, all of the different programs that dovetail with that service, and how that's going to be carried out over time. And so, like I said, there is a proceeding going on right now that is really kind of the result of Senate Bill 350 that's going to take us to 50% renewable energy, where these integrated resource plans need to be developed, shared with regulatory agencies, and you will be participating in that process. So there will be a plan that you'll ultimately need to develop here for Monterey Bay Community Power. And then in terms of power procurement, as I mentioned, this is something that really will get going very, very soon. So this implementation plan, if you choose to adopt it, will go to the Public Utilities Commission, and simultaneously we'll begin the process of planning for and reaching out to suppliers to figure out who it is that might be working with you initially to support the different energy products and provide the different energy products that your customers will need. And that process is anticipated to take off in September, with negotiations occurring after proposals are received. This will be a competitive solicitation process, a public solicitation process. Of course, the idea here is to deal with qualified suppliers of the different energy products that you may need. There are lots of them out there. You will get lots of proposals. There's a ton of interest in this program already. I know our organization gets lots of calls. I'm sure Tom's received lots of calls. There's a lot of excitement, and I think that's very good news for you. So that process will carry on in terms of the negotiations of these different agreements based on who you choose as your shortlisted group of suppliers. And then, of course, ultimately these agreements need to be executed so that you can have the different supply commitments that you need in order to launch the program. And you can see that timeline here.
Question?
Yes, Mr. Gatto.
When these contracts are signed, will they leave us with enough flexibility so that if 2 years down the road, a local source says, hey, we've got 10 megawatts and we'd like to sell it to you, that we're in a position to say, we can talk to you, rather than, I'm sorry, we're already booked with these contracts, we don't have any flexibility to take on new vendors?
Yeah, great question, and the answer to that is absolutely. And there's two ways that that's done. One is the explicit inclusion of substitution, resource substitution language within those supply agreements that essentially allow you to back down the purchases that you would make. Of course, you'd be liquidating that supply at prevailing market prices, which could be to your detriment or benefit depending on where those prices are, but it would let you bring in resources of your choosing in place of that supply. And then the other option, which I think is probably more where the needle will point in this case, is it's basically what we called a laddered procurement approach. So in the interest of rate certainty, budgetary certainty, and just general planning certainty, the approach that's been taken very effectively by other CCAs is one where your near-term energy requirements are substantially under contract. And when I say that, I mean 95 to 100% of your current year's purchase obligations are provided for via contract. And then looking out into the future, that kind of steps down over time. So that's where that laddered concept comes in. So you choose to launch a feed-in tariff program. You choose to find that local project and do business with that local project and fold that into your supply portfolio. You will have room to do that without interrupting or clashing with other supply agreements that you may have in place. So that's very commonly used throughout the electric utility industry, and we certainly recommend it here. And I think Tom could comment on that as well, but it's been used effectively really throughout the CCA space as well as the utility space generally.
And will this board have the opportunity to review contracts before they're signed?
Yeah, I'll let Tom speak to the process on that one.
Yeah, the process that was used in just about every other CCE is to send an RFP out, get indicative prices from suppliers. The suppliers will not give you a final price until the day you're actually going to execute the contract. And you need to execute within 2 hours from the time they give you the price. So what will happen is we're going to get indicative prices. We're going to decide on a smaller number of folks to negotiate with. And it's going to be negotiating only the legal terms and the credit terms of the agreement. Then when we're done with the negotiations, we'll bring all those agreements to you or to the operation board, depending on whose purview this one lies. And once all those contracts are approved without numbers in them, then the next day we will go out and tell all those suppliers that we already got an approved contract with, now give us the final price for the products that we asked for. They will give us the price at 9 o'clock in the morning. Sometime around 11 to 12 o'clock in the afternoon, all the confirmation agreements will be negotiated, and by 4 o'clock that afternoon, the signatures on these confirmation agreements are executed, and you have a contract, most likely several contracts that will take you into 100% of the first year of operation, maybe 80 to 85 of the second year, then something less in the third year, then maybe there will be something in the fourth year, maybe not. We'll see how it goes based on the prices that we're going to get. But that is usually how it goes. You're probably not going to see the numbers, but you will have the ability to tell us that we want to make sure that you don't exceed this price. So overall, make sure that you're not negotiating anything that will make the total cost above 5 cents a kilowatt hour, for example. So it will be a not to exceed limit that you're going to give us. Then we're going to go and negotiate the contracts and make sure that we stay under that number. Generally, none of the suppliers like to see the information out in public, and pretty much all the other CCEs have been honoring that request and holding the information and finding reasons why it needs to be held. And that's generally how this is going to go.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions, Mr. Termini?
Question for you regarding the RPS requirements. You know, I understand that they're low, and they're low for the other utilities across the board, but it seems like we're going to meet them immediately, and why we're pledging to meet them incrementally like PG&E has to.
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. I think it really just gets to how it is that you want to go about assembling your resource portfolio at the end of the day, and how aggressive you need to be and want to be. What we've seen, for example, at like PG&E, they're a bit ahead of the curve, to be honest with you. They're already at 33%, or were in 2016, and that's what customers will see in their power content label that goes out. There are a number of reasons for that, though. A lot of it is because organizations like these CCAs have formed. PG&E's retail sales drop. The renewables don't necessarily drop that much, so it inflates the proportion of their supply portfolio that's attributable to renewables. Does that make sense? So by CCAs forming, it's really interesting, and it's in the sense that it's great news for the consumer, because it's really a win-win. You have organizations like yours that launch. They kind of go through the roof in terms of renewables and GHG-free products that they offer their consumers. And at the same time, we've got an investor-owned utility that has carbon-free supply of its own. That really doesn't get back down. However, their sales base goes down, which means that as a proportion of their total supply, those clean energy sources are a little bit higher, but still not nearly as high as what we're talking about here. And that's really that's the way it's going to be for foreseeable future. But then you get out to 2024 and 2025, and Diablo Canyon relicensing is in play, and PG&E said that it won't do that, and that makes up about 25% of their supply portfolio, those nuclear resources. So anyway, that was a little off topic, I guess.
Bring the train back into the station.
Yeah, bring the train back to the station. So maybe you can help get me back on track here a little bit. So your question was?
Oh, we're pledging 45% by 2027. The first day we flip the switch, we're well beyond that. Is this just, like I said, pro forma for the PUC?
Yeah, it is. It
Okay.
is. What they want to see is they want to see how it is that you project out in terms of meeting the statewide mandate. They want to know what that requirement is. So you have a retail sales base that you anticipate serving. Obviously, the RPS articulates that a certain portion of that supply must be attributable to renewable resources. The PUC wants to know, what does that look like, right? So when they look out more broadly at the state from a planning perspective, they want to know, how does Monterey Bay Community Power fit in? What would your requirements be if you were intending to hit the RPS marks? Of course, you're going to go well beyond those, so it's really a moot point at the end of the day. But they still want to know how much renewable energy you would need to procure at a minimum in order to hit the requirement, even though you intend to go beyond that.
I want to help curb you a little bit, and that's one of the issues that we eventually have to come back here and talk about. We, in this plan, are telling the CPUC we will definitely live by the letter of the law and make sure that we are meeting the minimum eligible renewable resources requirement. But eventually we need to come back here and talk about what does eligible renewable resources mean, and is it that what we are actually after, or are we after reduction of greenhouse gas and dealing with climate change? And once we answer that question, then what we are recommending here, which is near 100% carbon free, may seem to you a whole lot better, even with being minimum on the RPS, than to increase the RPS but eventually not be 100% carbon free. Again, that's topic for probably next meeting. We're certainly going to be talking about all these things eventually.
Thank you.
Sure.
And of course, I think part of that discussion, and we'll likely be working with Tom on this item, is just, how that trade-off exists between increased costs related to renewable procurement and various other carbon-free products, and where you want to exist on that rate spectrum. So it's just kind of, where that fulcrum sits in that balancing act, and what you deem appropriate from a policy perspective, and then of course how that influences the procurement exercise that'll be unfolding as well. That's all I had in terms of the information on the implementation plan. I'm happy to answer more questions.
Any other questions? Ms. Parker.
Great. Oh, thank you. As I was reading through this, there were several areas that I thought merited further discussion and possibly inclusion in this plan. Really sitting here and listening to the discussion, I understand that this plan is maybe not the place for some of these, but I did want to bring up a couple of topics. And so one question I have is, in Chapter 1, there's reference to public participation, but under governance, there's no mention of, say, a community advisory committee, which we may want to include in our governance structure somehow. And so I can see that putting it into this document may not be the right thing to do, but I think I'd like to just flag that as something that I'd like to have come back for a conversation about what is the most robust way we can get community participation and input, and possibly including and I don't know if we can do this at this point, but possibly including a voting or non-voting member on this board itself, so that we're really hearing from the community. Another was we mentioned the default plan and a 100% renewable plan. Is there the possibility that another tier could be added if we wanted to? When we start getting into the discussion, and this is another topic that I think we probably want to talk about relatively soon, which is the question of the RPS, carbon-free cost, that whole balance, and what is the board's and the public's desire in terms of a direction and priorities, and really do an analysis and a broad timeline. But is another tier essentially possible when we've submitted essentially just kind of two options in this plan?
Absolutely. Yeah, as a matter of fact, recently Marin Clean Energy, they decided to offer a third retail service option to their customers, which is comprised of a 100% local solar supply. So pointing to resources that are within its service territory with costs that are reflective of the costs of those resources. And so, that's just one example. Really, the sky's the limit here. And to the extent that you wanted to create a third or fourth or however manyth service option, that's totally up to you.
Great. Thank you. And then in terms of the rate setting, I know our next item on the agenda really goes more into the rate setting question, but I did have a question about that, which I think actually is more appropriate to the next item, so I will leave it there. On page 8 of the plan, we talk about committees, ad hoc and standing committees. I can see that this document is maybe not the place to do this, but I think at some point we may want to talk about whether those ad hoc and standing committees are board only or could include community members, stakeholders, whatever, whoever might be appropriate, so that composition. And then the other question that I had, and again, I can see this is a later conversation, but it seems like it might be good in the relatively near future to have a discussion, to kind of do an analysis of our tri-county area and the possibilities for local generation, and to, excuse me, kind of this local procurement analysis, what might be possible in the nearer, medium, and longer term, so that we're not just sort of hoping, but we're being a little more intentional about that. In addition, I think there's a question of, and I don't know what all the things are to think about, but as we're procuring power, obviously cost is going to be an issue, and greenhouse gas emission reduction is going to be an issue. But are there other sustainability issues, such as what are the wages being paid, or are they union shops? Are there ways of grading them on environmental friendliness or sustainability, so that we can, I don't know what all the options are, but it seems like it would be good for us to discuss what are all the criteria that we're trying to meet when we're procuring the power, whether it's local or further flung. And then energy programs. Yep, I think those are my major points, and they were sort of coming to me as I read this, and I could tell that a couple of them at least would be a later discussion. But I did want to just flag them because I think they are issues that this board would want to and should grapple with in the fairly near term on some of them, so that as Mr. Habashi is going about, and you're going about the business of doing this, you know what the direction is that the public and the board is interested in trying to achieve. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, each a question going down the line here.
Thank you. So mine is more of a just clarification also, and understanding, again, as was stated earlier, the purpose of the implementation plan that will be submitted for approval to the CPUC. So essentially, as you had stated earlier, the plan, obviously, there's still a lot of questions, and there's still a lot of areas that need to be defined and need to be discussed. However, for the purpose of this plan, when we submit to the CPUC, they provide their approval. We can continue to treat this as a living document. We continue to amend it, and my question now is, after we obtain approval from the CPUC, how long in effect is that approval? Does the agency need to seek approval from the CPUC at a later time?
We are actually not seeking approval of this plan. This plan is provided to the CPUC in order for them to register us or certify us as a CCA. So they don't approve or disapprove of it. They just basically make sure that you submitted a plan that addresses the element that are required of a CCA in order for that CCA to become registered to operate. Sort of like getting a license from them. That's what we get. And once we get that plan is now aside, and we get to do everything that we want to do, everything that we talked about, as long as we live to the basic elements of that plan, i.e., we're not charging rates that are higher or not competitive with PG&E. We have a governance in place and pretty much in line with all the elements in the plan. But we don't really seek their approval, nor do we have to keep revising it in the future. This plan is done once and that's it, just to get the registration and move on. Sort of like the test that you go, when you go get your license to drive, you just take that test once and that's it. You get your license and you're done.
So the CPUC is just looking at the plan to ensure that all the requirements that are in the AB 117 are part of the plan.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's where, flexibility and including flexibility in the plan is really important, because to the extent that you include language within the plan that says we're going to do this and only this forever and always, that's a lot more limiting in terms of how it is that you might have this organization evolve over time. So, I think the way that it's drafted right now, you can have those discussions. This organization can evolve. This board can provide direction and shape how you all change and move over time without conflicting with this document. So,
Okay. Mr. Delgado, did you have another question?
Yes. Is it Anna? To follow up on Anna's comments, so once this comes back from the California Public Utilities Commission, do we have the option of making it a living document? Because it is so comprehensive that it's a great document. It's just that it may not be as non-vanilla as we may like it to be, because right now it needs to be vanilla. So can it be amended by us to continue being fleshed out to be what we really want it to be?
I think you will, in the future, have an entirely different set of policy recommendations that you get to discuss and debate. You will eventually have an integrated resource plan, because we're required to do that now by law as well. And that will have a lot of the elements that you see in this plan and then some. And that's the one that will continuously will have to update and keep it current, because it just basically said these are the resources that we're going to bring in order to meet our customers' needs. There will be plenty of other opportunities that we're going to come back to you requesting direction on this, that, or the other topic, and you will have plenty of opportunity to tell us what to do. But this plan is done once, a done deal. We give it to the CPUC. Once they give us the certificate, we don't look at it again.
Does the integrated resource plan use this as sort of its starting place? Is there much overlap between the two?
The integrated resource plan will have a lot more analysis to go with it in order to make sure that we are providing the resources that meet all the various laws and various requirements, and also bring in both energy efficiency and resources together in one big happy pot.
So this is a new opportunity for some of us to be in the midst of the starting of a JPA. So I'm looking down the road, and if someone wanted to know, who are we, what do we do, what do we believe in, what's our vision, it would be nice to give them one document that's comprehensive. And if we don't do that, I could see us having one document, an implementation plan that it's kind of vanilla, another document, integrated resource plan, and then we have various policy objectives that we've approved over the years. And so you'd say, well, here's 8 documents, and together they are who we are. Since we're starting fresh, I think it would be nice to have one document that was a living document that we could give to people and say, this is who we are, this is where we're going, this is where we've been, these are our sideboards, these are our constraints, these are our opportunities, these are our primary objectives. So I'll just say that. And then
that in general will be the strategic plan, which eventually will be developed after we come together and talk about some key policies. And once we establish those policies and all of us are on the same page, so to speak, there will be a strategic plan put together that will have all these elements that you're looking for.
Okay, so will the strategic plans sort of incorporate some of the main points in the implementation plan, some of the main points in the integrated resources plan, and then be its own most comprehensive document for our agency?
I believe so.
Okay. So the last thing I want to say is to point to page 1 of the introduction and statement of intent in chapter 1. The second to last paragraph in that page 1 says, MBCP's primary objectives in implementing the program are to reduce electric sector greenhouse gas emissions, which I'll point out that's what PG&E is doing as well. They're becoming more and more green, PG&E is. Stimulate renewable energy development. PG&E is doing that by becoming greener, so we would be in parallel with PG&E. Promote energy efficiency and demand reduction programs, and that's sort of part and parcel to what PG&E is already doing. So this is getting at what the potluck volunteers said. We don't want to be just another PG&E. They're already going greener. They're already getting most of their stuff. More and more of their sources are renewable sources. What they're not doing is going local. So that's kind of the end of our primary objectives listed here. What's missing is items such as providing access to local governance. Bruce mentioned that earlier. That's something we do that's different. We give the ratepayers, the residents, a local place to go, like today, where it's harder for those people in the audience to go to PG&E wherever they meet. And secondly, to provide an increase of opportunities for local power producers. So those are a couple of major objectives that I see that go well and beyond what PG&E will ever do. But they're not here. And I don't know if they're going to be in the integrated resource plan. I suppose they'll be in the strategic plan. So I guess my final little question here is, can this paragraph be tweaked at all without setting off alarm bells to talk about who we really are as different than PG&E? Because right now it does sound like a mini PG&E.
I respectfully disagree, because I think PG&E now is probably a combination of renewable resources as well as greenhouse gas free of about maybe 60%. This plan suggests that we're going to be near 100%. That's a huge difference. 40% of carbon free makes a great deal of difference in all of your plans that you have probably on the books that deals with climate change. And I'm assuming here that you do have a plan that addresses climate change and says what are the things that you're going to do, the amount of money that you're going to spend in order to reduce greenhouse gas associated with the counties and the cities that you serve at. If we go near 100%, then we've done a lot towards meeting the local requirements that you have to meet the greenhouse gas targets. And that saves you quite a bit of money that you might have to spend on changing some of your buses, changing some of the things that you do in order to become, to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So in a sense, by adopting a near 100% carbon-free, we have gone a long way toward reducing greenhouse gas for the cities. We've gone a long way towards addressing some of the local concerns and the local needs. I would suggest again that the implementation plan be as is. We will come back here again next month, the month after, and we're going to talk about the appropriate policies that we need to put in place in order to be able to meet the needs of this agency and of this community. We will show you in dollars and cents what it will cost to develop resources locally, regionally, statewide, out of state. We'll show all that stuff to you, then you get to decide how you want to do it.
Thank you.
And I think there's a little difference in, say, the profit incentive too. I mean, we're not here to lose money, but where our gains go are going to go right back into the system, and they're all going to be local.
The thing that we need to always remember that the customer is going to have a choice here, and they can opt out, and the level of opt-in out is different from one CCE to the other. It ranges anywhere from 2-3% for some of the recent ones that have rates that are below PG&E, to the ones that have rates that probably almost equivalent to, which can reach somewhere around 15 to 18%. You simply cannot implement policies that will eventually take you rates-wise above PG&E and expect that the customers are going to still hang around, especially the large customers.
Thank you. Mr. McShane?
Yeah, going back to something Jane said, I think several of us had raised the concept of a community advisory committee, and it sounds like that's going to come up later. But if you could just speak to what that looks like, and if there are CCs that do not have that, I'm under the impression that it's typical. Just a word or two about that, if that's okay.
I would suggest, I certainly do advise that eventually we put an advisory committee. I won't call it citizen, I would call it customer advisory committee, because it needs to have people from commercial customers as well as residents. The one thing that we need to remember, that for the next 6 to 9 months, you have most likely a one-person agency that is trying to staff 2 committees with consultants who are very busy. So just keep that in mind. Things will need to happen gradually, considering the fact that, one, we are not making any money yet. We are trying to get in debt. We haven't got to that point yet. And that we have very, very limited staff. And I know that some of the staff in the county of Santa Cruz are aching to get back to do their regular jobs, and I want to help them do that. And I'm hoping that you will help me get us there. So it is likely, definitely I support them having a customer advisory committee. I would not suggest that we need to do it next month.
Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Friend?
I just have a couple comments, and I agree with everything that's come up with it. A customer advocacy group and a customer base, we don't have any customers yet, so it's going to be hard to put a customer group together. The other is all those visions, and that's what they are, should be in our vision statement, which we can revise at a later time. But this is an implementation plan. This is something, if we don't get to the PUC, we don't have a vision, because they won't approve anything unless we get this to them. So I don't want to take Tom's side, but this is something we need to get to the PUC in general terms that can be modified later down the road. But if we don't get this to the PUC, we really are spinning our wheels here. And I agree with you that all those ideas and stuff should be in the vision plan, and that should be our driving force, and let the implementation happen at a lower level. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Ms. Kaufman-Gomez.
Thank you. This is just to at least show the public that we're really excited, because we're already wanting to move ahead, from first base to home already on this. So I think you can see that we do have the support to get this to the CPUC, get that clock started, and see what energy you have for us to help you along to facilitate what we need to do on the strategic plan, and putting the timeline together of when it's ready for the customer involvement and all of the other stages that we're anxious to get to.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Any other questions from the public? Anyone would like to speak to this issue? Okay, we'll bring it back to the board.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Adopt the resolution. Has been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered unanimously. Okay, we will go to item number 8, accept staff report regarding recommended approach to retail rate design. Mr. Hibashi.
I'm just waiting a minute
Okay.
until they load the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I wanted to share with you today is one of many concepts and policy ideas that I would like you to address, think about, and just give me an indication whether I'm on the right direction or not. This is not presented to you tonight or today for approval. It's just presented to you just so you can look at it and give me some indication of what you feel about it. To the extent that I get a positive reaction, then next month I will bring it to the operation committee, to the operation board, and again to you for approval. In terms of background, what I want to discuss today is two things. One, how do we set rates? And two, how do we deal with the surplus revenue that we're going to have, the net revenue, provided that we, again, go out and buy our resources from near 100% carbon-free, with the understanding that we're going to meet all the RPS requirements. So in terms of background, rate design is really have a number of approaches. The traditional approach that all utilities have used in the past is very methodical. What they usually do is they look at the cost of operation, total cost of what it will take to run the utility. Then they allocate that cost among metering cost and distribution cost, generation cost, public benefit cost, and so on. Then they take each one of those and allocate it among the various customer classes, and from there they develop rates. That's pretty traditional. That's the way they've been doing it for years and years. And it's more of an art than a science. And it does, for PG&E, goes through a very rigorous process that eventually takes about 3 years, and the CPUC review it and eventually approve it. The CCAs, when they started, they thought about doing similar process. Eventually, they decided maybe that's not the best way to do it, because the customer always had PG&E to go back to if they wish to do so. And so they wanted to do something that will be close to what the rates that PG&E is offering. For the early ones, Sonoma as well as Marin, they may have set the rates in a way that was probably a little lower than PG&E. For some customers, it was a little bit more than another. Then another wave of CCAs decided, I'm specifically here speaking of Peninsula Clean Energy as well as Silicon Valley Clean Energy. We decided just to take PG&E's rates, all of them the way they are, and discount them by something. Peninsula discounted it by 5%. We discounted it by 1% at Silicon Valley Clean Energy. And at least for Peninsula and Silicon Valley Clean Energy, the opt-out seems to be on a per customer base, about 2% or a little less than 2%. So at least that tells me that the customer really can't differentiate much between a 1% discount and a 5% discount. Keep in mind that that 1% discount is really off the generation cost, not off the electric utility bill cost. The generation is about 40% of the total electric bill. And of course, as you all know, you get one bill from PG&E that combines gas and electric. So really a 1% discount of the generation cost amounts to about maybe 0.3% discount on the full bill. It really doesn't really impress the customer much, and doesn't make a whole lot of difference for them. So I'm recommending to you a different approach, and I think I hope you like it as much as I do, that we just lock in rates with PG&E, just charge exactly the same rates. If they push it up, we push it up. If they push it down, we push it down. Just stay at lockstep with them. Basically tell the customer that if we don't do anything else, you are not worse off. You are being charged exactly what PG&E would have charged you anyway. Now, what is it that we're going to do that will differentiate us from PG&E if we adopt that idea? And I'm suggesting that there are 4 things that we're going to be doing. One, we're going to buy more renewable resources to get us to 100% near carbon-free. We're going to put some money in reserve, especially in the first few years, to make sure that we have enough money so we can have the credit necessary so we can invest locally in generation, because nobody will really give us a contract to invest locally or otherwise unless we have some money in the bank to back it up. Third will be offering customer programs, and definitely customer programs that seems to be winning the day today are programs that allow for fuel switching, that allow for peak shifting. All those will bring the highest return in terms of reduction of greenhouse gas. And finally, which is something that I know many customers in our service territory would want, is to provide a discount on rate. And let's see. I think we talked about just general analysis, the rate design. If we do rates that are different than PG&E, then that generally is time consuming. We have to follow PG&E, so we figure out what the rates are, then we design hours, and that takes a little bit of time for the data management people to plug that into the software. So we're always lagging by about 6 weeks in order to catch up with what PG&E is doing. And finally, a bunch of rate-related programs that PG&E is offering today. If you don't adopt the rates as is, you will end up not being able to do, especially any programs that require access to real-time data, because the way we're working now, because we have our own rates, real-time data comes to us 3 days after the fact. We have to actually ask PG&E, and 72 hours later on, they will give us that information, which of course negates the whole need for the program, because the whole idea is to have real-time data. So that's why I think from a rate design perspective, if we just match PG&E, we will not have to deal with these issues, whether it's the time consumption to create the rates or to deal with the lagging issues, and finally be able to adopt some of the programs that we are not able, or most CCEs today are not able to adopt. From this position of net revenues, some of the things that we're going to be discussing with you, and we need to spend time to talk about it, is renewable versus carbon-free. And a lot of people, and I'm almost certain some of you believe that renewable resource is a carbon-free resource. I suggest to you that that's not the case, and we're going to talk about this later on, and that if we are after really climate change, then we need to be talking about carbon neutral or carbon free rather than talking about renewable resources, because especially eligible renewable resources, because some of those resources are very carbon intensive, especially the biofuel, biomass, and whatnot. When it comes to reserves, we also want to talk about how fast or how slow we want to build up the reserves. Do we put every penny that we have left into reserves until we build the amount of reserves that we need, or do we work it slow and give more money back to the customer in one form or another? Again, for the programs, we will talk about energy efficiency versus fuel switching and peak shifting. And finally, for the rates, what I'm suggesting to you today is that instead of looking at discounts from the PG&E rates, that we offer instead annual rebate that will be given as a lump sum at the end of the year. So at the end of our fiscal year, which is September, it takes about 6 weeks to kind of balance the books, find out how much money we have left, push some into reserves, and what we have left, then we can give it back to the customer in terms of rebate. Which brings another idea, another program that I was thinking about. I can just toss it out there today, which is you can offer the customer, they can opt out, but they can also opt to give the rebates back, basically telling us, that's okay, I'll pay whatever I used to pay to PG&E, and take those rebates and direct them either to additional green resources or augment and give a little bit more to low-income customers that you have. So that could be a third option that we can offer customers. All right, so for your consideration is, I would like to propose that we, again, match PG&E's rates and focus more on carbon neutral resources in our resource mix to the extent that we can zero out or at least source enough energy to zero out the carbon in our consumption and accumulate the reserves as quickly as we can early on with the understanding that if we start maybe not at 100% of all the leftover money, maybe start at 90% and give 10 back to the customer, then the following year we can reduce the amount going to reserves and give a little bit more to the customer. And also when it comes to programs, I do like to focus on fuel switching and peak shifting because that does have a lot more reduction of greenhouse gas. And finally, I do like the idea of annual rebates, and again, I do hope that you like it as much as I do. I wanted to offer you just a quick example of how the allocation, and this is just one example, it's certainly not the one that I'm recommending, but if you look at the top line over here, and that's including your staff report, you'll see that for over the years, and this is, by the way, this assumes that we're going to be, our resources will be near 100% carbon free. The amount of money that we're going to have left over that we can direct towards all the areas that I've suggested to you, it starts at about 47 million, grows up, then it comes down again in 2020, then it kind of stays steady. I'm almost certain that that's eventually not going to be the case. That numbers, the real numbers are going to be a little different based on how PG&E moves their PCIA, and but we're probably going to be there in that ballpark year in and year out. And one idea here that I'm tossing out that we, for the first year, put 90% towards reserves. Then the 10% that we have left, we can split it. One half will go into funding the programs, and the other half will go into customer rebate. Then the following year, you would put in 70%. Let me get that straight. Yeah, I believe 70%. I apologize. I think the numbers are a little different than what I had in mind. But roughly the whole idea was to put in the first year, put in 90% in reserves, 5% in each of the customer programs and rebates, then reduce the amount of money going into reserves by 10% every year, then take that additional amount and push it into programs and rebates. Finally, once we reach the target of reserves, and the target here that I have in this example is 50% of our operating expenses, then everything after that goes into programs and customer rebate. Again, this is a very rudimentary example. It's not going to be probably one of the ones that eventually I would like to come back and recommend to you, but that was basically what the idea is. Just fill in the reserves, make sure that in 3 years you have reached the limit that you need, and then everything else becomes part of the programs and customer rebates. And I'll stop here and take any questions.
Yeah, I'd like to say I really do like your approach. I think it's reasonable, and it's good for us to get a solid foundation as we move. I think our primary goal, as we've been talking about this for the last few years, is to have a cleaner environment and at rate parity, possibly less, which I think is very much a reality in the future years. But I think it's very fiscally responsible for us to establish a reserve right from the start, and then as well give some kind of a rebate maybe at the end of the year after we see how it's going. I feel very confident that we can reach the goals that you've proposed here. I think it sounds like a good plan of attack, shall we say.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Ms. Parker?
Thank you. Yes, I do think this is a prudent approach. My concern is that in talking about this and in bringing it forward to the community and garnering community support, one of the planning assumptions was that the initial rates would be 3% below PG&E, and I'm concerned, and I do know that in Monterey County anyway, there was a good deal of price sensitivity. We did some polling. Probably the strongest price sensitivity was don't charge me more than PG&E. But I'm very concerned that if essentially people feel that a promise was made that their bills would be 3% less than PG&E, and now we say, well, gee, maybe we're going to do that and we'll give you the money later. It just feels like we're not not behaving with integrity. So my question is whether there are options within this, because I really like the idea of being able to kind of opt out of the discount or the rebate and allow that to get invested. But I guess my first thought was, because residents are a smaller proportion and we do have a significant population, even if they're not on the PG&E CARES program. People are kind of hand to mouth in many cases. Would it be possible to offer, say, that 3% below PG&E to residential customers with the option for them to say, no thanks, we want that to go into more carbon-free or whatever the other options might be. Because it's a smaller percentage of our budget, I just wonder if I'm just trying to make sure we keep our promises, but also maximize the prudent approach that you're taking here.
The approach that I would suggest, especially for the rebate, that we announce it in the beginning of the fiscal year. That we don't even we don't wait until the end of the year to say, oh, we have some money left over. Here it is. That we, knowing what our numbers are like in the beginning of the fiscal year, we can tell our customers from the beginning that our expectation is that we're going to get you somewhere between 3 to 5%, for example, and then wait until the end of the year, because it's possible that we may not spend as much money as we thought we were going to spend on programs. Then we can push that money back into the customer that goes into the rebate. And we're going to be okay about doing it that way because we know that we have a bunch of money going into reserves. So if the money at the end of the year don't add up to what we expected, well, then we push a little less money into reserves and give the customer that minimum that we said we're going to give him. So we still can, if you want to live up to the promise that was made, be able to promise the customer going into the operating year that do expect that you're going to get at the end of the year dividends on that investment that you made in your utility or into your association or agency that we have here. So I do expect that to be upfront. And I think, and I don't know about you, but I do like getting that check from Costco and the other check that I get from REI. It's much appealing to me than to actually get the discount on every time I'm going out there and spending money over there. I do like, I don't know about you, but I do like getting a couple $100 a check from REI, and I enjoy that check that I get from Costco, which probably I end up paying it back to them for the membership, but still.
Great, thanks. Well, I'll be curious to hear from the public, but I think that's an interesting option. Thank you.
Mr. Termini?
Mr. Habashi, 2 questions. Number one, what makes you reluctant to give a 3 or 5% discount below PG&E up front? And perhaps we could consider yearly adjustment of rates, keeping that below PG&E. Some years it might be 3, some years it might be 7, but somewhere in line with whatever the customer dividend may be for several reasons. It's the promise keeping, it's the way we marketed it, and there is a certain element of transient population in these 3 counties, and I want to be sensitive to them because they're the most at risk. They're the most that are hand to mouth, and they may be in a totally different area and never see that dividend. So even though a 5% discount may only wind up being a 2% discount in cash to them, it's more significant. So why the reluctance initially to start below PG&E?
Having to actually develop the rates ourselves is just logistical issue, and especially if we have to develop it and give it to PG&E so they continuously have to bill based on the rates that we are giving them. But if I just adopt the rates as they are, then all what they have to do is just use exactly the same rates and deduct the PCIA. That just from an administration standpoint, it's much easier to just adopt the same rates. Then that's one thing I don't have to worry about, and I don't have to dedicate staff time to, and I don't have to think about. It just happens automatically. I don't have to delay having to implement our rates after they do theirs, because we have to adjust and fix our software. But really the primary reason is I think giving the money in a lump sum is better than giving it to them monthly. Now, I definitely aware of the issue where we have transient folks that come in and work 6 months, and maybe in the implementation we can provide that dividend on every 6 months instead of providing it annually. That may be one approach. So that's my answer.
McShane?
Yeah, I don't know about you all, but I'd love to see this room packed. I'd love to see more people involved in local government, and I think the opportunity to give a rebate represents an invitation for our ratepayers to be more involved with where their energy comes from and how they can help offset the impacts of what energy is all about. So I really like the concept. I think that there's going to be pressure on public education on the front end, as we have hired a firm to help us in education to make sure that folks are aware that we are going to be offering them not just parity, but ideally less than what PG&E would charge. So I think there's some room to flesh it out. I agree with you. The check from REI is a nice example. So I'm excited to see how that could be worked out. And I think it's creative. It shows your experience with other CCEs and how we could come up with something that maybe even works a little bit more creatively. Couple of questions. PG&E raises rates every year. So if we're on parity with PG&E, is that kind of under the assumption that we're going to be raising rates every year, and if PG&E is going to hack them up, then so are we?
No, actually, PG&E raises the rates to their folks. The generation rates for PG&E has been declining for the last 2 or 3 years. So we are at parity with PG&E's generation rates.
I see.
What they've been doing is they're raising the distribution and transmission, all the other rates, to a point where you actually see an increase in rates, but in reality, the generation rates is actually being reduced.
Okay, a couple of other things. PG&E sponsors a lot of stuff. I mean, I've organized so many parades and barbecues and events. Do you see our organization playing some role in that, as part of our outreach strategy, or are we going to get out of that?
We're going to be in every event until you guys are sick of us.
Well, not for outreach, but I'm talking about, like, we have a holiday home lighting tour, and PG&E is the lead sponsor at $1,000. There's a process. You've got to make application. A committee reviews it. Is that sort of programming
yes,
anticipated?
Of course. Here's the good news that you should know about that. If you take all of the expenses for sponsorships, for participating, marketing, staff time, consultants' time, everything else aside from power supply expenses, that all of it amounts to about maybe 4 or 5% of our total operating expense. So you can bet we will do everything in order to be there in front of the community, in order to sponsor events with the community, in order to help with local development, because we know at the end of the day, no matter how much you do of that, you're really not making a huge dent in your operating expense.
Okay, maybe a couple, just on a roll here. Energy Watch is a program that AMBAG runs, and I'm kind of curious to find out what happens to something like that. You know, I know most of our municipalities have participated or benefited or collaborated. Is that still a PG&E program and a product of the distribution role they play, or does it go away for this region or it fall on our shoulders?
To be honest with you, I'm not familiar with it, and you're going to have to give me a little time to be.
Okay, that's okay. Yeah. And then, do you see an annual report coming out to our ratepayers? Is that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Mr.
Yeah.
Friend?
Two quick points, and they both, you know, the promise that was made about the 3%. If you look at Tom's approach with staying with PG&E rates, the expense that it would cost us to divide 435 individual bills and pay the taxes in the 3 different counties and 3 different the cities and all those things, the money saved by not doing that is going to be much more than the 3% that we offered as a rebate. These rebate, a year from now, we're going to be sitting in this room going, are you sure you want to give this much money back? Because that's a huge savings. Administratively, it's probably 35 or 40 people that would be required monthly to do that if it was just a simple 5% change, because the taxes are different, the rebates are different. If we stay with, I'm not saying a year from now we shouldn't adjust them or eventually get our foot on the ground and we can then staff up to do our own billing. But the opportunity to let PG&E continue the building is a huge savings. And I think that reserve is going to be a huge amount that we're going to see, opposed to what it would supposedly cost us to operate if we didn't. So those rebates and those returns, whether it's a check or whether it's more programs that help the people that are struggling for their bill, I think those are going to be huge. And I think a year from now, you're going to realize that we may want to change our rates because we're making that much money doing it the simple way.
Ms. Coffin-Gomez.
I'd like to clarify something for Mr. Habashi as well as the audience that's here. I've been involved in the PDAC, which was the origination of this policy board coming together 4 years ago. I was the only council member that had been participating with this project all along for the feasibility study and whatnot. And it's been very clear on the PDAC that we were not going to be going after a discount. That would be an option to be considered, but it wouldn't be the primary reason for us to build Monterey Bay Community Power. It was one of the options. We had other options with, again, the local resources, job creation, the competitiveness for the rates that we have, and then be able to consider if there's actually a discount. So never in the course of discussing this under the PDAC with the feasibility study and the presentations that were given from staff on this was there a discussion of a percentage discount. So I'm not sure where all of that came from, but again, it doesn't say that we won't be able to look at that as an option. It was not one of the primary options when this was originally presented through the PDAC, through with the staff to all of the local agencies. So again, I think that this is an option to consider. I think also that we need to make sure that we're building up a nice, solid foundation of what we are going to have here as a company, but we don't need to be going out already with a discount without knowing the entire plan that's a solid business model.
And the PDAC is the Project Development Advisory Committee that worked on this for 2 years. And
I had a chance to read the document, and I do agree with you. I've seen peppered throughout it the need to be competitive and to be at a minimum of parity with PG&E. So they were, at least in several places, which was a pleasant surprise to me, and probably why I'm making this recommendation to you today, is that you already thought of the possibility that you're going to be at PG&E's rates, but you will be providing additional programs to differentiate us from PG&E.
Mr. Termini?
To be clear, if we were to go below, say, 3% below PG&E, we would not have to produce our own bills, would we? Would we not just let PG&E know in the billing process what our rates were? I'm trying to understand a large staff for generating billing, if all the billing will always go through PG&E regardless of the discount?
Well, even if they did that, they're not going to do it for free.
Well, generally, the way this works is if we follow the same example that all the other CCAs have followed, you hire a data manager, and the data manager charges you for bringing the data from PG&E, multiply by the rates that you have developed, push it back to PG&E so they can bill the customer and bring the money and push it into your bank. I mean,
Right.
that's the process.
Understood.
And the data manager, we're not going to be hiring 20, 30, we're not going to be hiring anybody, but we will be hiring that data manager, and that contract now, the rate that's the going rate for all the other CCAs is about $1.10 per customer. Now, we have the disadvantage that we have a lot of residential customers, so they get charged the same thing on a per customer basis as a very large industrial or commercial customer. So roughly what we could end up paying that data manager somewhere around $4 million a year in order to push that information back and forth. To the extent that we adopt just PG&E's numbers and not deviate from it, then we may be able to save some of that money and not pay that much. I wouldn't venture as much as half, but it would be a reasonable sum.
Understood. And one more follow-up question. Where would clients go, where would customers go for the rebate programs they find at PG&E now, whether it's energy savings by replacing the lighting or any savings by design? What would be the mechanism at this point?
For all the energy efficiency programs that PG&E is providing, they will continue to charge our customers as they have been forever, and our customers will still have the right to go in on PG&E's site and take any of the programs and ask for any rebates that PG&E is providing. All the energy efficiency programs are administered under, or the money collected for those programs are collected by PG&E. They're separate from generation, they're separate from distribution, and they will continue on even with us being in place.
So the application process would still be via PG&E?
Exactly the same.
Perfect, thank you.
If I may. Charles Montoya, City Manager for Watsonville and also on the Operations Board. And I wanted to help out Mr. Abashi for a minute here. We talked about this at length on the Operations Board. The $4 million a year, and also there's a time difference. So after doing the data mining, there's going to be months difference before we can change the rates. So those customers are going to have 3 months delay as well. So now on top of the $4 million going out of the system, we could put that back in the system for the rebates and affect those rates quicker, doing it the way Mr. Abashi is recommending.
Thank you.
I just have a quick question or comment. So there's other CCEs that have already, that have adopted PG&E rates. So can you provide us with more information in terms of how successful they've been adopting the PG&E rates, and what other type of programs have they been able to, in the future, provide to the customers?
All the other CCEs in place today have adopted a discount from PG&E's rate. The smallest discount is the one that Silicon Valley Clean Energy is providing, which is 1% of PG&E's rates. And because we opted to work with the data manager on something called bill ready instead of a rate ready, that caused us to not being able to provide a number of programs like peak day pricing, for example. A smart rate program, we can't provide that. There's a list of about 8 different programs, and the names escape me, that we are not able to provide because all of these programs require access to real-time data. And since we don't have that access to real-time data, we only get it 72 hours after the fact. We are unable to provide these programs. Most of the customers haven't complained. Some did. We had, at least at Silicon Valley Clean Energy, we had a number of customers that were on smart meter programs that came and complained that we're not providing those programs, and those programs are good for them, and that's why they're going to opt out. If we just adopt PG&E's programs as the PG&E's rates as they are, we may be able to ask PG&E then to administer those programs on our behalf for our customers.
So just to be clear, for the other CCEs that did provide discounts at a certain percentage, with the lowest being 1%, they didn't have, because of that, they didn't have the ability then to provide further discounted programs to their customers that were that opted in the CCE?
Yeah, they generally, once they offered the discount from PG&E, then everything else was directed to the supply cost and all the other operation expenses, and whatever money they have left, they probably put it into reserves.
Questions from Mr. Delgado?
Yes, can you put up the slide that had the reserves?
Right there, isn't it?
That one. So I see that the bottom row, percentage of annual operating expenses ranges from 29% to 50%. So that if we were at 29%, then we would be we would have a reserve that represented 29% of our operating expenses, right?
Yes.
So if it was if we had $1 million operating expenses, I know it's more than that, but if we had $1 million operating expenses, then it would be $290,000 in reserve, right?
If we have $1 million operating reserves, $290 million operating expense, then the reserves will be $500,000.
Wouldn't that be 50%?
50%, yes.
I was thinking about the 29% figure. That's the lowest figure you have. Green.
For the operating reserves, you mean?
Yeah, percentage of annual operating expenses, 29%.
Yeah, the idea would be, for example, if you look at the year 2018, 2019, and 2020, you will take a portion, whether that to be 90 or 80 or 70% of the money left over, and you push it into reserves. If you add those three numbers together, they'll amount to a little over, it looks like a little over $90 million. And that $90 million constitutes about 50% of our operating reserves by 2020, because I think we roughly will be able to reach that 50% of operating expenses after the third year, assuming we follow this example.
Okay. So the reason I'm asking this is because in the state of California, if you look at cities, counties, municipalities, the most common set aside is 15%. A lot of cities go 20, some go as high as 25. So when I see 29 to 50, I think, oh, that's quite a bit higher than municipalities. So what the thinking goes into the size of our reserve?
Yeah, the energy business is a little different than most other utilities that you're accustomed to, whether it's water, wastewater, or refuse. Most of the expenses there is capital intensive. There's not a whole lot of surprises that you may end up getting because most of it is fixed. With the energy business, it is the market can move on you fairly quickly, and that's why you need to have enough reserves to deal with any unforeseen circumstances that can cause huge rise in market prices, for example. And if you left with a 10% open position and you get an increase of 20, 30% increase in market prices, then you're going to be paying for it. So the reason you want to have high reserves is just to make sure that you are stabilizing your rates just in case you get caught. And also to have enough capital, because if you want to go and actually invest in building anything, you just need to have a lot of reserves, because that's what builders and developers will require. If you don't have that, they can't give you a contract because they won't be able to get the money from the bank in order to build whatever that is they need to build.
All right, thank you.
This is equivalent to about a 6-month cushion, or how would you put it?
That's correct, yes. And generally, to begin with, I'm putting it at 50% because it's a reasonable number. I'm sure 5 years down the road, as we begin to operate and we begin to develop resources, we will be able to do a little bit more of a technical analysis to decide on what the value at risk is, and that becomes the amount of money that we need to set aside.
I had a,
Yes.
my other question is regarding the rates. We've had some discussion already about the rates, the potential 1%, 3%, whatever. And I think that the dividends program, rebate program is attractive to the middle and upper socioeconomic groups. And I think that the straight out discount is going to be more attractive to the lower to middle socioeconomic groups. In the city of Marina, we have a high percentage of Korean, Spanish, Vietnamese ethnicities. And I think when they consider this, the first thing a lot of them might say is this going to be cheaper? And the answer would be yes, because you're going to get a dividend at the end of the year. And it's going to require some thought and some discussion and some communication. Whereas if the answer was yes, it's going to be not a lot cheaper, but it's going to be 1 or 2 or 3% cheaper. So I think for the more struggling economic classes, a dividend concept it might be harder to convey, and it might not be as attractive to them as what they're used to, just bargaining and getting a low price because they need to consider price as a primary consideration more than some of us who really would be. I'd be willing to pay more for greener energy, more local energy, et cetera. But I don't think there's a huge percentage of people that might be in that category. I have maybe a silly question, but in order to address what I just said as a marketing tool, could we give the first year? Could we give like a signing bonus, like $10 or something? So if we're able to promise a 3% dividend at the end of the year, would we be able to promise some kind of a signing bonus? Because I'm just thinking that most of the time when you're starting something new, your biggest influx of new customers is going to be at the start. And then over the years, you expect to get some more people on board, but that big surge is going to be at the beginning. And so if we can increase the number of initial sign-ins and this big surge, that's our big opportunity, I would think. Because once people get in or get out, opt in or opt out, they're less likely to change because it requires paperwork and research and their lives are busy. And so can we give them some incentive to sign up now at the start that's other than in a year you're going to get a 3% check?
2 points probably to make here. One is that they are by default will be our customers. So they're not going to sign in. The only thing that they can do is to sign out if they decided to stay with PG&E. So they actually have to do something in order not to be our customer. They don't have to do anything to be our customer. They actually just can take that notification, toss it down the trash, and we're done. So that's point number one. Point number two, which I think is more important, out of the gate, we do not have money. We don't actually, we have to wait about 3 to 4 months before we see ourselves being in the black. That's why we need to go get a line of credit from a bank for $13 million worth. Maybe after a year of operation, if the board feels like, you know what, maybe what we ought to do is to actually give the money up front, then we can act that way because by then we're going to have some money. But at the gate, we just don't have the money to give as a sign-up bonus or otherwise.
Yeah, I might add your comment, the reality check, that the discounts, you use many viewed it as a bait and switch marketing tactic. Is that what reality showed when your experience?
We've got that from at least Silicon Valley because with the 1%, a lot of people felt like, this is just such a small discount. You're just baiting us with the 1%, and at the end of the year, because you're not promising anything that you're going to do at the end of the year, you could switch that number on us, and then PG&E will be cheaper. But by that time, we're not going to be opting out because it costs money to opt out and so on. So to the extent that you say you will never be worse off and promise that upfront, and also to say upfront, I'm expecting, based on the numbers that I've seen in my budget, that it looks like you're going to get somewhere between 3 to 5% return on your on being a customer of ours we're going to award you for your loyalty. I think that probably would go a whole lot better than just to say upfront we'll give you a discount of 1-2%, which will amount to really nothing on monthly basis. Then get the customer to feel that who knows what's going to happen at the end of the year, because all what they're promising me is they're going to be competitive, and I don't know what that word means, because competitive could be a little higher, could be a little lower. So I'm in the line of thinking that tell them up front what to expect, then give them that credit at the end of the year.
And this is, at the end of the year, we're talking, because we're going to start up the first part of next year, or the spring of next year, the end of 2018, in essence, is that right?
My thinking is it's at the end of the fiscal year. So at the end of the fiscal year, you balance your books, you find out how much money you want to give back, and somewhere around early December, because it takes about 6 weeks to balance the books, then you can give that money back.
Gomez?
Yes, I think there would also be an educational process of this particular percentage up front anyway, because it isn't the entire bill, which may be the assumption people will have, and it's only just a very small fraction of this. And having to explain and market that in the process of telling them we're giving you this discount now may be even more confusing than what we're trying to accomplish and the cost it would take to even go through that process. And I think you've also mentioned that if we do it in hindsight, we've had a chance to look at the books, see what's out there, what we do have for the options. And many of the residents that are in the different socioeconomic classes may already qualify for programs that offer the discount. So it's a continuity of still being provided the service at a discount. So we're not skipping over them at all with doing this the switch over to the community choice.
Yeah, I just want to mention clearly that all the customers, the low-income folks that do qualify for discounts, they will get exactly that. They're not a penny less that they're going to get. That is part of the distribution cost that PG&E collects and give away.
Any other questions from the board? Any questions from the public?
Good morning. First off, my name is Benjamin Eichert. I work with the Romero Institute's Green Power Project. I just want to say it's really exciting to see everyone here. We did a lot of work around trying to support the formation of Monterey Bay Community Power, and this is the first of these meetings I've had a chance to come to. One question, I'm confused about a couple of things, and this is for the interim CEO. I felt like I heard you say earlier that one of the programs, I think San Mateo, provided somewhere 3 to 5% discounted rates, Silicon Valley 1%, but that you saw no discernible difference in opt-out rates. And I thought I heard you say, well, the customers can't really tell the difference between the amount of the discount, just whether or not there is one. Can you clarify that?
They are given 5% discount. We are given 1% in Silicon Valley. By account, both entities have less than 2% opt-out, and I can guess or attribute that to the fact that the customer are not using how large a discount is as a decision to opt out or stay in. That may not be the case, but at least the fact that both of us are given two different numbers and ended up with the same number of accounts opting out seems to indicate that what kind of a discount you give is not material until probably it gets into the double digits. I don't know. We have never tried it nobody ever tried to give a double digit discount. All the CCAs are worried about the indifference charge that PG&E is charging, and obviously they have to keep that into account. That's why everybody's pretty much trying to stay very close to PG&E's rates. I hope that clarifies.
A bit, yeah. Without going too much, I didn't study business or marketing, but the work that we do at our organization, I know everyone here knows, we want to pay particular attention to the most vulnerable in our community. I want to echo a couple of comments that I heard about the potential impact on people who live a more transitory lifestyle, who may sign up and start receiving electricity, at some point and then move to someplace else and never realize the benefit of that rebate. I also would encourage the board to think about those folks in this community that make the decisions, that aren't shopping at REI and Costco. They don't buy Patagonia. Their decisions in life are about, what kind of soup or what kind of food are we going to buy in the grocery store. And again, just from my personal experience, I'll look at the cost of the item versus some potential mail-in rebate or something like that. I really want to encourage you to pay attention to those members of this community. While there was never a guarantee that rates were going to be lower, there was a lot of material that was aspirational that said it's our belief that we will be able to lower rates. I understand that the rebate is a form of lowering rates, but I also see just some potential concern if people are just, their bill isn't changing. And so one idea I would like to propose is potentially this concept of an instant rebate, where you wouldn't have to actually change the rates. Your rates would be the same, but you would just offer that rebate. You anticipate what that rebate's going to be and divide it up over the 12 months and issue it on a bill-by-bill basis so that people are experiencing a lower bill. That might be a way to get around the rate changing and having to recalculate different kinds of rates for everyone. Anyway, also just quickly, the Romero Institute continues to offer our partnership, whatever we can do to help this board in understanding concerns and issues within the community. We're always here and happy to help. Thanks.
Thank you. I want to thank the Romero Institute again, as we have just about every meeting, for their support system and explanation to its communities about how valuable this is going to be for our Tri-County area. Is there anyone else from the public who would like to come on up, please?
Take this slightly in the left field, but I'll try to bring it back very quickly.
What's your name, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Barry Katz from Aromas. I don't represent any organization but myself. Just some quick research. I see that in California last year, electric generation represented 19% of greenhouse gas emissions, and transportation 39%, basically double. It seems that in the other goals that the state is, even in the Paris Accord, the goals that we're trying to reach toward carbon reduction, emission reduction, transportation is going to have to be a huge factor. So I know in recent years, electric generation has been, the demand has been going down. But do you foresee it going the opposite way, possibly doubling or more? And because it seems like electric vehicles and partially electric vehicles are the only thing on the near-term horizon for portable, the only way really to bring greenhouse gas down from transportation.
I think it's about a 50-50 split of the greenhouse gas emissions, isn't it? Transportation and your electrical.
I don't know. I just Googled that and came up with 19% electric.
Well, transportation is higher than the electric utilities. Electric utilities greenhouse gas has been going down with more renewables coming online and coal being taken off line. That's helping a great deal, and we want to obviously continue that until we completely take the last coal power plant offline, not just here in near California, because I don't believe we have a single coal power plant in California, but anywhere on the western grid if we can help it. I think the gentleman is making a very good point, and one of the programs that we are likely to come back and recommend to you is charging stations everywhere, help the folks that are driving electric cars not worry about running out of juice, so to speak, and also additional rebates for electric cars. That helps in definitely by bringing in by taking out emissions associated with gasoline, burning gasoline, and bringing in electric, which is more cleaner, electric consumption is a lot cleaner, and at the same time increases the electric consumption, and by increasing electric consumption that brings in money to the agency, and that's why programs that provide for fuel switching, which is definitely electric cars as well as their charging station, bring in on a lot more reduction of greenhouse gas on a per dollar basis than many of the other programs that pretty much reduces the electric demand.
For example, in my home, we've leased 2 electric vehicles, and we've seen our electric usage more than triple. So if you add that to even half the vehicles in California, cars and trucks, I'm wondering if you're anticipating the idea that the demand could double or triple.
I think that's an option we can surely explore. And I know as a member of, or on the board of Metro, that has been able to get some grants for electric buses. I mean, there's options available where we can, for public transit as well as individual transportation. But good point, good point.
Just a factor, and we talked about 1,400 megawatts locally sourcing that much. The other, just quickly, PG&E also has a very significant electric vehicle rate. It sounds like you're looking to copy all of their rate plans. Is that the thought?
That's correct, yes.
And you would very much like to keep the time of day as part of it, right?
Yeah, the PG&E is now running a pilot program on changing the time of use, and they plan to implement the new approach, which will reduce the cost for what used to be the most expensive time. Between 12 and 4, that's going to be the least expensive time because of the overabundance of solar generation in the state, while it will increase the cost between 4 and 9 in the evening, because that's now the most expensive price for wholesale electricity. So we, yes, I would like to parallel what they are doing when they go into a time of use default.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Any other comments from the public? Yes.
Hi, Laura Florio from Salinas. I just wanted to bring up again the whole issue of which customers we're addressing in terms of their financial impact. Stable renters who pay their own utilities and homeowners obviously live in the same place. I don't know if there's been any analysis of what kind of movement there is in our communities. In the 93905 school district, there are a lot of families that change their address. You could check with school districts to see, how often students move to get an idea. Obviously, a lot of workers even leave the area. So I think it sounds like you are going to move to a rebate system, is maybe looking at a way so that most people can actually receive, part of that benefit from going with this program. I think rebates are really not that familiar with a lot of Costco customers, for example, because people pay with cash. I think I get my rebate from my credit card that I use at Costco. And so I think that this may not be, in many communities, not a usual way that people see the benefit of shopping or going with a certain product. So thank you.
I just want to make a quick comment that it's not out of question for us to consider the idea of when a person moves and leaves the forwarding address, that we send a check to that forwarding address with the amount of rebate that was due to them since they left before the year ended. We're actually doing the same thing today at Silicon Valley Clean Energy by rebating some of the NEM customers, the net energy meters, because we promised them that we're going to give them cash to the extent that they have a balance that works in their favor. And I know that just yesterday I've approved a whole bunch of payments to people who just moved out, and we just needed to pay them the balance that would due them. Of course, if it's due us, they will pay us, but at least I had 15 names of people that moved in the last month from those customers that we just cut checks to them.
Any other comments from the public?
Hello, my name's Paul Gutierrez. I live in Salinas, and when I'm hearing the numbers and maybe the discounts that might be available and the opportunities that exist, I did hear during the presentation that commercial is a large segment of the Monterey Bay Community Power, and I was wondering what maybe a rebate is in terms to just the residential customers and what that number is out of the actual budget rather than 3% of total income brought in. And I was just thinking, I know a lot of people that struggle right now. We all help friends and family members buy school clothes right now, right? And there's days when I'm up early at 4:30 in the morning, and I see people out working underneath the light, and that's kind of the people we need to think about, and they're not all under the CARE program. They're out hustling and bustling every day. So if we can provide some type of relief, even if it's just a few percent, I think it's an act of good faith saying, hey, Monterey Bay Community Power is about community. We understand the needs of our community. And I know just as many people that put on a suit and tie and nice clothes to go to work that are struggling as well. So if there's any consideration or any opportunity to put a little bit back in the pocket, be nice to do. Thank you.
Anybody else would like to address this from the public? Okay, we'll bring it back to the board. We have a staff member with a recommended approach. I don't know if how we want to specify or go back to something, if that might be a basis for a possible motion, or if somebody wants to make one outright.
Well, I'm convinced. It took a long time for me to get there, but there's a certain part of it that is faith in our executive director, part of it in the rationale, and part of it because we can change it as we go along. We don't have to take this step and make it forever. So I would move the staff recommendation.
Second.
I have a question,
Yes,
clarifying
Ms. Parker.
question. Thank you. One of the suggestions was taking the rebate and having it be an instant rebate. Is that feasible at all, or, is it feasible?
I don't understand how the instant rebate would work.
I think what he said was that, we can estimate what the rebate might be at the end of the year. And his question was, can you take that rebate and then count it back, divide it by 12 and provide it on a monthly basis?
So it's a discount from kind of like.
Right.
Here's what I would like to
Does that get
suggest.
to the administrative cumbersome question?
Here's what I'd like to suggest. This report did not recommend anything. If you notice, there's no recommendation section. It was just more of putting some ideas about, here's some of what we're thinking about, and just to gauge your input. And I've got that already. I've heard you all. And what I would like to go back and do is, for next month, is to come back to you and say, okay, now based on what I've heard, here's 3-4 different options that we can follow. Here's one recommended option that I would like you to adopt, but all the other options are also doable with pros and cons associated with each. Then have you, at that time, vote on what.
So you would like to have a motion, have us wait till next month, September 13th?
That's correct. I was not asking for. I
We're just trying to save you time, and I was putting my support behind meeting PG&E rates. I don't know if that's something you wanted to hear, or.
I would refer to Dana just to make sure that whatever motion that you're going to make is done correctly, because we did not ask for recommendation.
Not an action item.
And then, Mr. Montoya, you had from the operations board?
Yeah, I wanted to help Mr. Abashi on that comment. The problem with offering a rebate up front is the customer has not generated any power. So if you give them the rebate up front and they move, then there's a fiduciary responsibility or problem there. You gave money away without earning anything into the system.
Good point.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chair, I think what it comes down to, I think generally speaking, and you're probably picking up on the direction that you needed, we're very supportive of what you've brought forward. It seems there may be some disagreement on whether there be a discount that's provided every period or a rebate at the end. And maybe that gets fleshed out and discussed a little bit more. I think to start, the way we could bridge it is to run with the rebate program. I think it's very, very creative, but I definitely would agree that we need to make allowances for our lower income customers and ratepayers, and in particular, the remarks to the transient nature of some of the customers that we'll be providing power for. So I have a feeling that by the time this does come back for a vote, you'll have enough time to really consider that.
Yes.
So we
Withdraw the
motion in the
Yeah.
second, and then
Like
we'll
to see options.
discuss this in more detail before a probable decision on September 13th.
I would like to know if there's a possibility when this does come up that we really have the fiscal numbers together on it so that we can see how much is it going to cost, because if it's going to cost us more money to do one process over the other to benefit the consumer, I really want to make sure that we are getting a good bang for our buck on getting it back to the consumer in the best way possible.
That's definitely what I had in mind, that the options that I will present you with will have some solid numbers associated with it that will say, this is what I'm recommending will go to reserves in the first year, the second year, this is what I think need to go into the programs. Here's what's going to go into rebate or discount, and here's how it's going to be done. And it will be all with dollars and cents associated with it.
Because here's another point of that is, let's say we're talking about $1 million and it's going back to the consumer. But if that $1 million was actually put into a program that can exponentially grow to help with a reduction, then we have to sort of really do the analysis and weigh the benefits of maybe not immediate, but being able to invest it so that in the future it's a long-term discount that's available to them that wouldn't have the opportunity if we gave it away up front too quickly in doing so.
Okay. Any other comments from the board on this?
I just have a quick comment in terms of, I know it was stated earlier that not all the participants are in the programs that are offered by PG&E. So I think we also have an opportunity moving forward as we're putting this together, is that we're including, or those individuals that are already part of a program, that we're also targeting those that may not be part of a program but are eligible to be part of that program. How do we factor that in as part of our process as well?
Any answer? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, that completes our agenda items, and we will now adjourn to our next policy board meeting on September 13th. When does the operations board meet? Just for public
I believe
information.
it's on the 6th.
September 6th, the operations board, I think, meets next. We will meet here in the Watsonville City Council chamber at 9 o'clock in the morning, September 13th, for the next policy board of Community Choice Energy, Monterey Bay Community Power. This meeting is adjourned.
Great.